Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to begin by welcoming members and officers and those members of the public watching via YouTube. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and tweet during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and we will make our way downstairs now to the main entrance. The muster point is on the green opposite the main entrance. The meeting room has been arranged to comply with public health guidance on COVID safety. In line with their latest advice, committee members and officers are asked to remove their face coverings only when they are speaking and to wear masks for the rest of the time, please. Right, item 1 is apologies and declarations of interest. Dawn, do we have any apologies?
We have apologies from Councillor Schumann. We've got Councillor Hayes substituting, Councillor Coles and Bowden, also from Lee Fanco, and we have Matthew Pink attending virtually.
Thank you.
Before we go on, could I just ask, I can't help but notice one of our colleagues is not wearing a mask, and I wonder if that is, there's a particular reason for that.
If I could just emphasise that we should all be wearing face coverings to protect each other, look after each other, unless there's a reason not to do so.
Excuse me, if you're referring to me, I suffer from asthma and I find for short periods, mask is fine, but for any longer, it just makes my breathing bad.
Okay, thank you. Well, quite clearly, there are people who have good reasons to do so. Some of us are exempt and some of us choose to wear masks when we are exempt. Right, if we can move on. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest?
Yeah, John Walker. I'm a member, a pensioner in the fund. Both my son and my daughter-in-law are deferred members.
Thank you, John.
Chair, we've also got Matthew Pink indicating he'd like to declare an interest.
Okay, if I can hand over Matthew.
Yes, Chair, I'm an active member of the fund and so is my wife.
Thank you. Okay. Any others? No? In which case, if we move on to item 2, which is the public minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of September 2021. We're being asked to approve the minutes of the Pension Fund Committee meeting on the 30th of September 2021 as an accurate record. Can I ask if any member who does not agree with this proposal to raise their hand now? Thank you. I see no objection to the proposal to approve the minutes as an accurate record, so we will take that as carried unanimously. Thank you. Turning to the action log, do officers have any comments or updates? Nothing to add. Do members have any questions on the action log? Okay. Thank you. We are asked to note the action log. I trust everyone is in agreement. Thank you. Right. Item 3 on the agenda is petitions and public questions. And we have received 7 public questions. Some of the speakers are joining us via Zoom, and for those not able to join us, I will ask the Democratic Services Officer to read out their questions. All public questions have been circulated to committee members in advance of the meeting and are also available with the agenda and meeting papers on the County Council's website. I will take them in the order that they were received. As the questions are all on similar issues, I will ask officers to respond when we have heard all of the questions. Dawn, could you read out the question from Cambridge City Councillor Hannah Copley?
Dear Chair and members of this committee, can I draw your attention to the following? In 2020, Bath and North East Somerset Pension Fund Committee looked at climate change modelling work undertaken by the fund as part of the 2019-20 investment strategy review, leading to a series of climate change objectives and asset allocation changes. In July 2020, Calderdale Council's Cabinet agreed a request the West Yorkshire Pension Fund disinvest from fossil fuel companies. In September 2020, the Cheshire Pension Fund became one of the first in the country to report on the carbon footprint of its £6 billion worth of investment portfolio. From Devon County Council, the Devon Pension Fund believes climate change poses significant risks to global financial stability and could therefore create climate-related financial risks to the fund's investments unless action is taken to mitigate these risks. For the East Riding in Yorkshire Pension Fund, the committee recognises the significance and importance of climate change and the fund's investment strategy statement and responsible investment policy cover the extent to which social, environmental and ethical considerations, including climate change, are taken into account in the selection, retention and realisation of investments. Glasgow has asked the Pension Fund Committee to formally commit to ending fossil fuel investment before the city hosts the major climate change conference, COP26. Greater Manchester Pension Fund are committed to reducing the environmental impact that our investments have. We aim for all our investments to have net zero carbon emissions in line with the Paris Agreement on climate change. Islington Council decided to decarbonise their pension fund's investments in 2022 by reducing the fund's exposure to carbon emissions and reducing the fund's equities exposure to fossil fuel reserves. The South Yorkshire Pensions Authority reviewed its responsible investment and climate change policies at a meeting last week, in which it set a goal to become carbon neutral. It called on the authority's officers to come up with an action plan within 6 months. Waltham Council's decision to divest from fossil fuels helps tackle climate emergency and create a better environment. Nest is a public corporation. It is accountable to Parliament through the Department of Work and Pensions and is the largest pension scheme in the UK by membership, with 9 million savers. It has a climate change policy to decarbonise its investment portfolio. Nest's CIO says no one wants to save throughout their life to retire into a world devastated by climate change. A recent Chatham House climate risk assessment report from September 2021 stated that the world is dangerously off track to meet the Paris Agreement goals. The risks are compounding. Without immediate action, the impacts will be devastating in the coming decades. It is clear that business as usual is failing us. At every stage, as individuals, communities, organisations and as members of local government, we need to be doing absolutely everything within our power to rapidly decarbonise as part of a fair transition. As a society, we are suffering from the effects of the COVID pandemic, whilst in the background, fossil fuel companies are orchestrating a mass greenwash exercise, whilst simultaneously attempting to extract as much short-term profit from our planet for as long as possible. The International Energy Agency says we can't have any new oil, gas or coal development, yet fossil fuels companies are spending tiny fractions of their investing in renewables as compared to new oil and gas investments. I've gone over the time, Chair, so you do have it in front of you, and I'll just come to the end, the question which says, will members of the Pension Fund Committee agree to support full divestment of the pension fund fossil fuel industry in order to send a strong signal to the fossil fuel industry and residents of the county of their commitment to climate action and their willingness to make a stand against widespread greenwashing?
Thank you, Dawn. The next question is from East Cambridgeshire Climate Action Network and will be presented by Mr. Jethro Gold via Zoom. Do we have Mr. Gold there? You have 3 minutes.
Hello, thank you for your time today. Some of the big fossil fuel majors are recognising that the writing is on the wall for oil, coal and gas. Last year, BP announced a 14 billion asset write-down, acknowledging that a shift towards renewable energy and the net zero targets will result in a lot of stranded assets for them. There's a real risk of that remaining invested in fossil fuel companies who hold these assets will end up losing the council a lot of, sorry. But in 2015, the UK local authority pension funds lost nearly 700 million when the market for coal collapsed. And Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, has issued a blunt warning that investors like pension funds could face potentially huge losses as action on climate change could make reserves of oil, coal and gas literally unburnable. Other companies have shown how the transition to clean energy can create new business opportunities and support high-skilled jobs in the process. In just over a decade, the Danish company Ørsted has shifted from a predominantly coal-based energy business to being a world leader in renewables, particularly offshore wind, creating a multi-billion-dollar business in the process. The council has declared a climate and ecological emergency. We now know that investments in fossil fuels are not only harmful to the environment, but also put the sustainable future of pension funds at risk in plain financial terms. Other local authority pension funds, such as Oxfordshire and Cardiff, have already committed to fossil fuel divestment. So this isn't anything new. Will the Pension Fund Committee commit to full divestment of the pension fund from investments with exposure to fossil fuels and set a date for this to be completed by? Apologies, I slightly gobbled that, but thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Gold. We have also had representation from Burwell Environmental Group who would like to endorse the comments made by East Cambridgeshire Climate Action Network. I would like to ask Ms. Lara Davenport-Ray to present her question. Ms. Davenport-Ray, you have 3 minutes to present your question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm asking my question on behalf of a coalition of climate groups that spread across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. On November 24, the Combined Authority Board resolved to implement the recommendations of the Independent Climate Commission. The Climate Commission's second recommendation states that climate change assessments should be undertaken for all decisions. The management of Combined Authority staff pensions is overseen by this committee. So my question is quite straightforward. Given the Combined Authority Board's resolution to reduce the creation of carbon emissions, how can continued involvement in the investment in fossil fuels on behalf of Combined Authority employees still be acceptable? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davenport-Ray. Dawn, could you read out the next question from Danetta O'Hara, please?
As a pension fund member, I find continued investment in fossil fuels both morally untenable and financially imprudent. As has been stated to me in previous correspondence, this committee considers a general policy of engagement over blanket divestment from fossil fuels. What actions have this board undertaken with regards to engagement? Has this committee approached every organisation they hold investments with that is directly and indirectly involved with fossil fuels? And if not, which organisations have been excluded and why? What was the intended outcome of the actions? How has the success of this engagement been measured? And by your criteria, has it been successful?
Thank you. The next question is from the Chair of Peterborough in Transition, Mr. Stuart Middleton. Dawn, could you read out this question?
The financial argument to divest is becoming increasingly salient. Fossil fuel divestment is a practical, legal and responsible way for pension funds to respond to the climate crisis and address the financial risk caused by continuing to invest in stranded assets. Nationally, at least 6 local councils, 86 universities, and the UK's biggest pension fund, Nest, have all committed to divest, not to mention countless respected institutions across the globe, including the cities of San Francisco and Oslo, as well as New York State. Recent analysis found that local government pension funds had suffered a $2 billion hit to oil investments since 2017. As the value of fossil fuels continues to decline, continuing to invest public money in this failing industry is becoming financially riskier, and the imperative to divest from fossil fuels is ever more urgent. Further, in the face of extraordinary economic challenges ahead, we need to reset and create a new economy that places the health of us all above the wealth of a few. Local councils must play a part in this by moving the money they manage out of fossil fuels and into socially useful investments in the local economy. On behalf of Peterborough in Transition, I ask what steps this committee is taking to end fossil fuel investments and invest in a green and equitable recovery for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough.
Thank you. The final question comes from Cambridge Friends of the Earth. Dawn, could you read out that question, please?
Given the numerous statements made by the councils making up the combined authority regarding steps they're taking to mitigate climate change, how can it justify maintaining investments in the fossil fuel industry? Given the continued investment in the fossil fuel industry by the combined authority's pension fund, why should we believe any statements made by them regarding their proposed climate change mitigation measures?
And thank you. I would like to thank, on behalf of the Pension Fund Committee, all of the individuals and groups who have taken time to make representations to the committee. It is really good to have that public engagement. Can I ask Mark Whitby, Head of Pensions, to respond to the points made? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and just reiterate those thanks for those questions and the interest in what we're doing as a fund in this area. I'll just make a short statement, which really talks about the further action we're going to be taking. The Pensions Committee are today considering a revised responsible investment, or RI policy. That's a culmination of over a year of deliberation, and that's been the subject of consultation with each scheme employer in the fund and tens of thousands of scheme members. The proposed RI policy is suitably ambitious, lending support to the Paris Agreement, support for a just transition to a low carbon economy that ensures fair treatment for employees and communities that would otherwise bear the brunt of the industrial change, and includes the setting of a net zero target. The policy would lead to significant decarbonisation of the fund and significant improvements in climate and stewardship reporting. The fund is taking a lead role in working alongside other funds in the access pool, where we invest the majority of our assets now, to ensure these RI ambitions can be met. In early 2022, the committee is expected to be finalising plans to decarbonise the fund's portfolio. The intention is for these plans to be fully aligned to an appropriate transition pathway and have clearly expressed carbon reduction targets as milestones. The committee's fiduciary responsibility means that the primary purpose of such action is to manage the fund's climate and carbon risk within the fund's holdings. However, the committee believes that keeping the global temperature rise this century to well below 2 degrees C relative to pre-industrial levels is entirely consistent with securing strong financial returns. The committee's approach is one of engagement over blanket divestment of any sector or region. This is entirely consistent with the Paris Agreement and a just transition, as even the most ambitious transition pathways require a full mix that includes oil and gas decades into the future. The fund expects each of its investment managers to appropriately manage environmental, social, and governance risks alongside financial risks, and constructively engage with investee companies on any issues identified. Should these issues not be addressed satisfactorily, selling or divesting from the individual stock remains an option. So that's the end of my statement.
Thank you, Mark, for that response. And I understand the response will be sent out to individual people who've sent in questions. Once again, I'd like to emphasise that we really do appreciate hearing from people, because it does allow us to understand other views. Thank you. If we can move on then to item 4 on the agenda, which is the Administration Performance Report. Can I ask Jo Kent, Governance and Regulations Manager, to present this report?
Thank you, Chair. I'll briefly run through the contents of the report, starting with section 2 of the report, which is the key performance indicators for the period in question, 1st of June to the 30th of September. The KPIs are in Appendix 1. And you'll see from the report there are 2 rows where we have some red indicators. Sorry. The first one is the payment of retirement benefits from active employment, and the second payment of pension benefits from deferred status. There are some reds here because we had these are our greatest.
Sorry, could I just, sorry, is there? Okay, perhaps if you move the microphone a little bit closer, that might. For that interruption, if I could ask you to continue.
Thank you. So as I was saying, the 2 areas where we have red indicators are a reflection of some system outages we had earlier in the reporting period that have had a knock-on effect into the following month. We've also had some issues with slow performance of our software as well. And we're also seeing an increase in the volume of deferred pensions coming into payment, which has put extra stress on that KPI, but we're hoping to see that improve as we go forward. It may be that we need to add extra resource into that area if those numbers are sustained. Section 3 of the report is receipt of employee and employer contributions. Nothing further to add really to the report other than the rate at which we are receiving contributions and the schedules on time are very good. We had 100% in August, so that's great. Breaches of the law, just the usual ones to report here on the first line. Oh no, sorry. These have all been resolved now. So we had some late submissions from the employers to produce pension savings statements and annual benefit statements. The information wasn't received by the deadline, so we were not able to produce that information for our scheme members by the deadline, but that's now been resolved. Section 5 of the report is the IDRP, which is a formal complaint process area. There's a fair number of IDRPs on that table in section 5.2, but I should stress that these are ongoing ones which have largely now been resolved. The most recent one that has come in was dated the 6th of September, and I confirm we've had no new ones since. So that just represented a period of increased activity, but also to say that these can go on for a little while depending on the nature of the complaint. So it may take longer than a 3-month period to resolve them, but that area is all looking very healthy now. Final point to make is the customer service excellence standard that the service works to every year. We've maintained that criteria and accreditation for another year. So just to make that point. Happy to take any questions from the report.
Members, Alan.
Thank you, Chair. One point, it's on the table appendix 1. It's the payment of pension benefits from deferred membership status, where we've got a red rating on all months. Obviously, is there any underlying reason for that? Is that because they're deferred members, we just don't get the information in time?
That's largely not the reason. With deferred, they are quicker to process because we have the benefits calculated already, and the member has made a decision to receive them at that time. What we have here is a growing volume of them, and we're not sure if this is going to be sustained or not, or it's just a reflection of the period of time that we're in where people are deciding to claim their benefits. or at an earlier date than they perhaps would. So yeah, we are looking at keeping a close eye on this area to see if we need to dedicate more staff to that KPI in order to keep the volumes being processed in accordance with that 90% target.
You've partly asked my supplementary, which is that if it's purely a logistic situation, i.e. staffing, then you're obviously keeping that under review, as you say.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's no other underlying reason behind the fact that the numbers of claims have increased from what you're saying.
I think Mark wants to come in here.
Yeah, if I may, Chair. So defer. We didn't used to have an indicator for this at all. So this is something we added in fairly recent times compared to the rest of the indicators. As we saw, as the fund gets more mature, you have more and more deferred members, and therefore you get more and more of these. So you expect them to go up. But we've seen what was reported to me as 50% increases year on year. So we've done some detailed looking, and unfortunately, what's happened is it did indeed go up, but then it dropped right off over the last month or so. So I'm trying to understand what's happening with this, and as soon as we do, we'll deal with the resourcing side. The other thing I was just going to add is that the continuity of income issue that is obviously always present when someone retires from active status is not always the same for retirements on deferred status, although it can be an issue. So that's just sort of just understanding that people take deferred pensions for a variety of reasons. And if we have anywhere we understand there are continuity of income issues, we immediately prioritise that.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions at this time? I would just like to ask one point, if I may. Obviously, one of the things that you talked about is the resource and system issues that have impacted performance. Could I just ask briefly how those have been addressed, and how can we be certain that system issues, which really are something we should be able to deal with, are not going to be repeated?
Yes, so the system issues were, well, in a way, all related to an outage of the WNC corporate network, which lasted a couple of days. Then everything came back and it was working okay, but it did have an impact, obviously, in the short term, particularly on indicators where we have a 5 working day turnaround. But then what actually happened was we over time got worse and worse response times to our remote server. And it turned out in the end that it was related to a firewall issue at our end. We're obviously exploring it from both ends. That's now been completely resolved. So effectively the corporate network being knocked out then created something which over time got worse and worse until it was manifestly a real issue. But I do believe now it's all been resolved.
Thank you for that. Just one other point that I actually had is obviously there's 1 or 2 points where we talk about employers not submitting the information on time. Is it possible to work with these employers to make sure that that situation doesn't occur? And I assume that no one has been actually materially impacted by a failure or by this failure of employers to submit the information that you require.
Given the examples in this report, there's been no material impact on the members concerned. We were able to redress this situation quite quickly once we became aware that we didn't have this information in place. But I think Corey has something to add to that.
Thank you, Jo. Yes, Chair. We do have an escalation process in place with employers, which was recently restated at the employer forum that we held last month, which I'm working through with employers as well. So we do pick these up and interject where we need to.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, the committee is asked to note the administration performance report. Are we happy to note that? Thank you. Item 5 is the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund Annual Business Plan Update to 31st of October 2021. Can I ask Mark Whitby, Head of Pensions, to present this report?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just go through, if you like, things which are, I think I do need to bring to your attention, and any updates since the report was drafted. So the first sections are around some procurement activities. Really pleased to say that the investment consultancy contract has now been signed and sealed. So that's now complete, along with the custodian contract. The other activities in that space are for the next year's business plan. Just scrolling down, the BCP, the business continuity plan, I would say now a draft is complete, which will be going to the next local pension board for consideration. I think probably if you're in agreement and in the interest of time, we'll probably just let you know any feedback from the LPB, unless you absolutely want to see it. But that will be in next year's business plan in any case. The cyber resilience, which is an important activity we're covering later today. So scrolling down to a couple of projects. So the Gmp Rectification, we're continuing to do work on that, having received the data that was causing real delays on that. So we've been working with a partner, ITM. That's probably now going to actually continue through next year, so that will appear in next year's business plan as well. The McLeod has turned in, I probably do need to bring to your attention, talking about employers, it's become far more complex than we imagined, because we were originally going to use a major payroll provider to field a lot of the data inquiries, but they wanted in the end for us to go direct to each of these schools or academies they undertake services for. So that dramatically increased the number of sort of contact points, and therefore the number of queries that we've been dealing with. But we're just getting all the information in from scheme employers at the moment. And I think next year and the year after will be the rectification in line with every other scheme in the country. And if I just move down, the one activity which I think has not gone how I would like it to is the undecided leavers. I'll make no secret of that. It's gone a little bit up in terms of numbers, and I want it to be going down significantly. We haven't had the resourcing right in this area, so we have put an extra person into the business as usual team. So that will stop any new cases becoming aged. The recruitment of that is just concluding now. So there's been a number of people, vacancies within that team. So we're just getting up to full capacity in that team now. And the other thing is, in terms of the projects team, because of the impacts of some of the other projects we've got, I have had to increase the capacity there as well. So we're going to recruit 2 extra people in total, which is 1 per fund. And where I'd like us to be is reducing our backlog by 3,000 a year from next year. So I'm making sure I've got the resourcing right to be able to deliver that. The only other item I'd probably like to just mention is the property review, sort of, which is towards the end of the business plan. And in discussion with the chair and the vice chair, because we would like to free up capacity in the next investment subgroup meeting to deal with the action plan around decarbonisation, we've actually agreed with them to defer the property review until the subsequent meeting. So we have a few things that we definitely need to go through at the next ISC. The property review is one that we could defer. So that's in discussion with the chair, vice chair, that's what we've proposed. I have no other comments apart from that, Chair.
Members, any questions? Ian.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to the McLeod review, do you think you will need additional staffing for that, following your comments with regard to the volume of extra work and what have you? And then with regard to the business as usual extra person, is that full-time or part-time?
The BAU extra person is full-time. we kind of have an idea of how many early, so I call them early leavers because they're earlier than receive entitlement to immediate retirement benefits. We have an idea obviously of the volumes that flow through, and I think actually putting that extra person in should be enough to deal with that for the 2 pension funds we look after. The idea of the extra 2 people in the projects team, one which would be funded by the Cambridgeshire Fund, is to have enough resource to deal with projects aside from this work. So it does depend on what McLeod brings. If a lot of the work can be system-based, then we will have enough. If it turns into a really, really detailed manual project, it's possible that we will need to put more resource in. But what I would say is the whole rationale for some of the structural changes that I'm putting through, which is the creation of a systems and projects manager, is to deal with projects like McLeod.
Any further comments, questions? No. Well, the committee is asked to note the business plan update to the 31st of October 21, and I assume we're happy to do so. Thank you, Mark. Item 6 is the risk monitoring reports. Can I ask Michelle Oakenson, Governance Officer, to present this report, please?
Yes, thank you. So this report is the risk monitoring one that we bring to the Pension Committee twice a year. In between that, this report goes to the Pension Fund Board. So this report in front of you today is really a consolidation of the meetings of the Pension Fund Board and everything that we've discussed at those meetings. In Appendix 1 are the proposed changes that we're making to the risk register. A large driver in the changes was due to increased activity around pension scams and cyber security. But what you'll see in Appendix 1 is the full detail there of the proposals that we're making, along with any recommendations from the board also. Most of the recommendations there are really to make the risk register as robust as possible, adding in mainly some mitigations to make it stronger, and there's a few scores updated in there also. Just to mention the short-term risks also in the main body of the report. We've still got some short-term risks going on in terms of obviously the impact of the pandemic continues and some of the admin pressures that are facing the fund. Under section 3.3 is the knowledge of the pension committee and the board, as we've mentioned before, and I'm sure all of you would have received an email last week just as a reminder for the training. And what we should see then is once the deadline has been and gone for the training, and as everybody participates in that training and time goes on, the risk will lower on that particular one as well. So really this report is to really highlight in Appendix 1 the proposed changes that we're making and to make sure that the committee are happy with those changes. And it's also for the committee to review the risk register itself to let us know if there's anything that you would like us to add in from your perspective also. If you're happy with everything today or anything extra to add, we will update the risk register and publish it on the website for everyone to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Members, is there anything you would like to ask? And with the invite, is there anything else you would currently like to add or to be considered under the risk register? Ian, Alan, even. These masks, confusing.
With mask off, yeah, it's very difficult. Thank you. Slightly a curveball one. It affects the risk, and it was touched on about the pension scams that affect members. And we've all probably seen the TV adverts where, you know, somebody switches all of their pensions from a very safe pension pot to this wonderful panacea that's going to give them everything they want in retirement. I just wondered what checks and balances are in, you know, if somebody and I'm sure you must get loads of them on a daily basis, so this might not be practical, but what is there if suddenly you see somebody who's done maybe 40 years service wants to move everything out of their pension pot? What I know it's their right to do it, but what sort of checks and balances are there to protect and make sure that they haven't been the subject of a scam? So I know it's a curveball to the risk management, but it is a very important risk to, I'm sure, potentially any pension, you know, future pensioner.
Take that question if I may. There's recently been new regulations brought out where we can actually do a lot more to prevent a transfer out than previously. All of our processes have been completely reviewed for pension scams. So we at various stages throughout the process of someone inquiring to do a transfer out to the actual paying a transfer out, we undertake lots of investigation with member themselves and the company that they may be transferring to, particularly if it's overseas as well. You really can't do a great deal without us asking an awful lot of questions with a transfer out now. So it's a very robust area, and the new regulations absolutely help that too, because there is a statutory right to transfer that we can now override if we really think it's going to be a scam. But a lot of people do make decisions that perhaps as pensions people we wouldn't agree with, but we still have to allow them to transfer out if there's no scam reason. So it is a very robust process that we operate.
Sorry, that's great to hear that we're obviously putting in balances to protect, hopefully protect, you know, the vulnerable pensioner or future pensioners. That's good. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. I think scams is, you know, one of the most awful things for these people who've, if you like, saved through their life for this. So that's good to hear. Any other questions, points, anyone? I would like to just pick up on one point that you raised there, which is around the training, and just urge everyone, please complete all of your training. I have done all of mine now. So it'd be good to see that everyone else has as well. Thank you. Right, the committee is asked to review the current risks facing the fund. Are we happy that we have reviewed that as much as we can at the moment? In which case, item 7 is the governance and compliance report. Can I ask Joe Kent, Governance and Regulation Manager, to present this report?
Thank you. This is a really short report this time. I don't wish really to add anything to what's been written in the report, only to echo what Councillor Whelans has said about the training. If anybody feels like they aren't going to meet the 31st of December deadline, could you please let Michelle or I know so we can arrange for the links to remain live, and just so we know when you think might be an appropriate time for you to be able to finish that training, just so that we can conclude our work around that and then modify the risk register accordingly. But that's all I'd like to say about the report. Thank you.
Members, any comments, questions? Okay. On that basis, we are asked to note the contents of the report, and I take it we're happy to note those. Thank you. Item 8 is the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund Training Strategy Review. Can I ask Michelle Oakenson to present this report?
Thank you. So this is the training strategy review. We've had a training strategy in place and it felt appropriate to review the effectiveness. And what we've brought to you today is the proposal of the new strategy. So in essence, some of the guidance and regulation sections have been updated to make sure they remain fit for purpose and relevant to what we're trying to achieve. Some of the full guidance hasn't been released, such as the good governance review. So there may be need at a later date to just go back and tweak some of those. But as it is today, this is the training strategy that we feel would provide us with the most comprehensive training. So in terms of the review itself, probably the most significant change for members is in terms of the practical changes and how we're going to deliver the changes. So currently what we have in place is under the current strategy is a credit system. And we developed that in mind we'd have the target would be 18 credits over a 2-year rolling period. Over time, what we've seen is actually it's not maybe being the most effective strategy in place. And what we want to do is move the strategy over to the more of the matrix system, which covers the SIPFA core competencies, as with the training that we've been undertaking, rather than attaching credits to them. And the main reasons for this are, firstly, we think it'll be easier to follow, that we are prescribing core training for you to follow. So it's there in black and white where it is and what you need to do. It also would ensure that all committee and board members have a broad knowledge of training. So what could have happened, or maybe what's happening in certain circumstances of the old system, is that training could have been quite focused on one area. So for example, you could have 18 credits, but you could have them all in investments. And also it was becoming over time a little bit subjective in terms of some of the training conferences and what was being delivered, about what the actual value of some of those conferences were. And actually you could attend a day conference and get 2 credits, but actually learn more relevant information in a half a day session, but you were getting less worth in the credit system for that. So really this, the actual training strategy itself is in Appendix 2 and a track change version in, Appendix 1 and a track change version in Appendix 2. So really we just welcome any comments from the committee if you're happy with the proposal going forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Members, do you have any comments at all, questions around the training? Ian.
Thank you, Chair. I just think it's a much better way forward, than we'll all know precisely what training we need to do and everything else. So I do approve the way we're going.
Thank you. I'm sure they'll be pleased to hear that, because I think sometimes this is a very difficult area, and I know for lots of us who have specific industry training requirements, you can end up very much in that position described where your training all becomes very, very narrow, and it doesn't give you all of the skills that you need. Anyone else have any comments? Alan.
Thank you. Just touching on Ian, I think it's very good in terms of training. I've still got a few of the modules to do because the original dates clash with other meetings, but I'll certainly try over the Christmas period to catch them all up and get them done, because they're not just important, I think, to be a member of the committee, but they're actually quite interesting in some of the detail they bring up. But
I would echo that. I think some of the information is quite fascinating, but then possibly you and I are slightly biased from our backgrounds. Okay, are there any other questions, Edna?
Yes, just to say, while we're at it, I confess also I have some modules left to do. I fully intend to do them by the end of December. Obviously, they did clash with work. But I wonder if we could, in fact, keep these modules going a bit longer, because sometimes it's good to go back more than once. Keep the modules live. I know that was an earlier item, but it might be helpful to keep them live for a bit longer. Is that possible?
The links will still work, we believe, up to the 31st of March. It may be that Aon will take them down at some point, because the information can get outdated quite quickly, but we are looking long term for a sort of a more robust training experience. But yeah,
Thank you. I appreciate it's the ability to look back again. Thank you.
Indeed, I think that's actually the point, that sometimes you don't actually use some of the information that you may have learned. So having a way of being able to go back to that. And I know we have the officers that we can refer to quite easily, but sometimes it's nice just to be able to look and just see that. Even things like the slides, making sure that everyone has slides available would be quite a useful exercise. Thank you. Any other comments, anyone? Right. The committee is asked to approve the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund training strategy. Are we happy to do so? Yes, I see no objection. Okay. Item 9 is the employer admissions and cessations report. Can I ask Corey Blows to present this report, please?
Thank you, Chair. This is a standing report that we bring to the committee at each meeting, just to detail the employers that have entered the fund and have left from the fund. I don't have anything in particular to add to the report this time, but just to summarise, there are 3 employers that are entering the fund during this period, 2 of which were backdated. We had closed those cases previously, but were asked to reopen them by the scheme employer, and we're duty bound to do so where everybody agrees to abide by the regulations. And all contributions that are retrospectively collected have been collected for those 2 cases. On the exits, there's 3 exits from the scheme. In 2 cases, there are no exit payments or credits to apply because the liability has been moved to a new employer. In one of the cases, as detailed in the report, there is a deficit that needs to be paid, and they have requested an extended period to repay that. We're working through that at the moment as we're finalising our approach to the deferred debt arrangements and the debt spreading arrangements. The stage we're at with that at the moment is getting the legal documents in place to underpin those agreements. Once I have that standard document in place, I can start the negotiations with these employers in more depth. I have nothing else to add, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to when you set out the repayment plan, and it's been agreed by both parties, what happens if then there's a default in paying that repayment plan? So where do we go then?
So that's one of the kind of things I'm looking at in the legal agreement at the moment, to put arrangements in place for what happens if there is a default. If there's an agreement in place and we have a charge on assets, for example, or some other conditions on that, then we can terminate that agreement, is what I'm planning to do, and require immediate payment in that case. But exactly how many defaults that requires to do that is what we're bottoming out with the solicitors at the moment, because that'd be quite an extreme case to take with an employer that can't afford to pay all of it at once. The approach is about maximising the amount that the fund can collect, and sometimes doing that over the period of time is the best way to ensure we can collect the maximum amount.
I assume from that we don't, envisage that there's any situation whereby they wouldn't be willing to pay this, and that they wouldn't have the assets over time to be able to pay this.
But that's one of the things that we look at when we're looking into the agreement with them. We do have the employer covenant assessments that we can carry out now, a framework for that, to look at that affordability behind that. But effectively, we do due diligence. We look at their accounts, we look at the assets they hold, and we make sure that we're fairly comfortable that those will be in place for the duration of the agreement that we agree with them.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions? Any other points? No. Okay, so we're asked to agree the recommendations as set out on page 111 of the agenda pack. Are you happy to take them all as agreed in one block? I see no objections, so we're happy to do that. In which case, that is as agreed. Thank you. Right, come to item 10, which is the exclusion of the press and the public. The committee is asked to resolve that the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the following 2 items contain exempt information under paragraph 3, part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed. information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. Are we happy to move to exclusion of the public? Yes, if we can close the.
Would you mind just taking a 2-minute break so I can make sure that it's switched off? Is that okay? Mike's on.
We will take a 2-minute break while that happens. Thank you.